Imagine waking up one morning in the United States to discover that an entire sector of American agriculture, once seen as unbeatable, has just lost a staggering $15 billion. Not to Europe, not to China, not to any Western competitor, but to Africa. Yes, Africa, a continent long dismissed by Western analysts, underestimated by American economists, and ignored by global agricultural giants, is now shaking the very foundation of U.S. livestock dominance. African cattle, African dairy, African goats, African meat processing plants, African export facilities, all of it, combined, has just triggered one of the biggest financial losses American farmers have seen in decades. $15 billion evaporated. And Washington didn't see it coming. But how did Africa pull this off? How did a continent once labeled developing suddenly rise so fast that the U.S., the world's agricultural powerhouse, is now scrambling to respond? And most importantly, what does this mean for global food power, international markets, and the future of Africa's economic transformation? Welcome back to Iazicho Africa. And today, we dive deep into America's $15 billion livestock meltdown. A story of shock, strategy, revenge, opportunity, global realignment, and Africa's unstoppable rise. Buckle up. The news broke quietly at first. A few agricultural economists mentioned it on morning TV. A couple of newspapers wrote short articles. But within hours, it exploded worldwide. The U.S. livestock sector, beef, dairy, poultry, pork, recorded a massive $15 billion annual loss. Exports down. Domestic prices collapsing, market share shrinking, supply chains disrupted, confidence shaken. Why? Because Africa's livestock industry has entered the game in full force, and it is not holding back. What used to be a continent exporting raw materials is now exporting high-quality processed meat, high-value dairy products, premium beef, veterinary-certified cattle, and livestock bred specifically for global markets. For decades, the U.S. had an iron grip on many African and Middle Eastern markets. But in the last 5 years, something changed. Africa upgraded. Africa modernized. Africa industrialized. Africa invested strategically. And the results are now shaking America to its core. Let's break it down. Africa didn't stumble into a livestock revolution. It built it. Quietly, strategically, patiently, and now, very successfully. Massive government investments. Across Africa, Ethiopia built the largest livestock export facility in East Africa. Nigeria invested in ranching, dairy clusters, and new export corridors. Kenya expanded its leather, beef, and goat production. Botswana modernized one of the most efficient meat processing systems in the world. South Africa doubled down on beef and dairy exports. Billions of dollars went into animal genetics, feed production, ranching modernization, abattoirs, cold chain logistics, veterinary labs, disease control systems, export certifications. Africa didn't just want to supply meat. Africa wanted to win global markets. Partnerships with BRICS nations, China, India, Russia, Brazil, South Africa, all stepped in to help African livestock grow. India provided breeding technology. Brazil offered ranching expertise. China invested in cold chain logistics. Russia supported veterinary medicine and disease surveillance. South Africa linked African products to European markets. Africa built alliances outside the Western sphere. And that changed everything. The rise of intra-African trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, opened massive internal markets, 1.4 billion people, a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. Livestock products now move freely across borders. Nigerian beef into Ghana, Kenyan dairy into Uganda, Ethiopian goats into the Middle East via African ports, Botswanan beef into South Africa. The continent's internal demand skyrocketed. And once Africa learned to produce for Africa, it learned to produce for the world. New export markets. Africa began exporting livestock products aggressively to UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, China, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Egypt. Many of these countries used to rely heavily on U.S. meat suppliers. Not anymore. The American livestock industry didn't expect to lose to Africa. It underestimated the competition. Here's how the U.S. set itself up for a fall. High production costs. American farming is expensive. Feed prices are high. Labor costs are high. Land is expensive. Regulations add heavy financial burden. Africa, on the other hand, cheap labor, vast land, low feed prices, faster growing herds, lower operational costs. When African meat entered global markets, it was often 40 to 60% cheaper than American meat. Buyers switched instantly. Overconfidence and complacency. For decades, the U.S. assumed Africa is not a competition. African meat won't meet global standards. American farmers will always dominate. Those assumptions were wrong. Africa not only met global standards. In some sectors, it exceeded them. Botswana, for example, supplies premium beef to European supermarkets at higher quality than many U.S. producers. Political tensions hurt American exports. Countries grew tired of U.S. sanctions, U.S. interference, dollar domination, trade threats, political conditions attached to deals. Many Middle Eastern and Asian nations switched to African suppliers for one reason. Africa doesn't use sanctions as bargaining tools. Africa sells. Africa delivers. Africa keeps its word. And buyers love that. Competition from BRICS. BRICS helped Africa rise and simultaneously competed with the U.S. This double pressure pushed America out of markets it once ruled. The United States didn't just lose money. It lost power. Beef sector losses, $6.2 billion. Countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, China, Angola, Congo, Algeria, all shifted from American beef to African beef sources. Dairy sector losses, $4.1 billion. Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, Rwanda, and Ethiopia have booming dairy processing industries now exporting high-quality milk powder, yogurt, cheese, and butter. These products replaced American dairy imports in Gulf countries, North African markets, Asian markets. Poultry losses, $2.4 billion. Nigeria, South Africa, and Morocco now produce poultry at competitive global prices. Goat and sheep losses, $1.7 billion. Africa, especially East Africa, dominates the global goat market. Leather and byproduct losses, $600 million. African tanneries, especially in Ethiopia and Kenya, are now top exporters. This livestock revolution is not just about exports. It's changing lives. Millions of jobs created across East, West, and Southern Africa. Ranchers, milk processors, abattoir workers, export freight companies, veterinarians, feed manufacturers. Millions of youths are now entering the livestock sector. Rising rural economies. Villages once dependent on subsistence farming now sell milk commercially, raise hybrid cattle, export goats, supply processing factories. Money is flowing into rural Africa. Technology everywhere. Africa now uses AI-based animal tracking, drone surveillance, disease monitoring apps, climate-resistant feed, cold chain management systems, modern breeding technology. This is not the Africa of 1990. This is the Africa of global competition. Africa is becoming a food powerhouse. For the first time in history, the world is looking to Africa not as a place of hunger, but as a major agricultural exporter. This shift changes global power dynamics. The U.S. government is not taking this lightly. Emergency agricultural meetings. American senators and industry leaders are pushing for subsidies, increased tariffs on African meat, trade restrictions, lobbying for new deals, diplomatic pressure. Washington is already attempting to convince Egypt, Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria to reduce African livestock exports to protect American farmers. But those days are over. Africa is no longer dependent on the U.S. Media campaigns. American media is now framing African meat as unsafe, African dairy as unregulated, African livestock as low standard. This is the same tactic used against Chinese and Brazilian products in the past. But modern African livestock industries are certified. They do meet international standards. And buyers know it. There are 5 main reasons. Price advantage. Africa simply produces livestock more cheaply. Political stability and trade. Africa doesn't use sanctions or political threats. High-quality meat. Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, and Kenya have premium meat quality. Halal market dominance. East Africa is now a halal export giant. Africa is the future. Countries want long-term partners. not countries that make trade political. Let's highlight some major African winners. Botswana, premium beef exported to Europe. Kenya, dairy and goat production skyrocketed. Ethiopia, Africa's goat and sheep export king. South Africa, massive beef, poultry, and dairy exporter. Nigeria, invested heavily in ranching, processing, and dairy clusters. Morocco and Egypt, becoming top MENA region suppliers. These countries now compete directly with U.S. farmers and win. This $15 billion loss is just the beginning. Economists predict Africa could earn $50 billion annually from livestock by 2035, become the world's largest source of halal meat, dominate leather and dairy exports, replace U.S. suppliers in many Middle Eastern and Asian markets. Africa is rising, and the world cannot ignore it. For the U.S., more losses expected, increased competition, declining influence in global food markets. For Africa, more jobs, more exports, more foreign exchange, more global respect, more economic independence. For the world, new supply chains, more food diversity, more competitive prices. For decades, Western nations told Africa, you can't compete. You don't have the capacity. You will always depend on imports. You will always be behind. But today, Africa is proving them wrong. The continent has the land, the youth, the technology, the partnerships, and the ambition to become a global livestock superpower. The United States is shocked today, but tomorrow, even bigger surprises are coming. This is Africa's century. This is Africa's rise, and the world must adjust. Thank you for watching Iazicho Africa, your #1 channel for bold African stories the world tries to hide. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, because Africa's rise has only just begun.